Hey guys, welcome back to the show. You know, we talk about a lot of crazy stuff on here, aliens, Bigfoot, government cover-ups, you name it. But sometimes the truth is even crazier than fiction, and it's happening right under our noses. Today we're diving into the Great White North Canada, land of maple syrup, hockey, and some seriously messed up conspiracies that turned out to be 100% true. We're talking about government secrets, shady experiments, and cover-ups that would make even the most skeptical listener raise an eyebrow. These are the stories the government tried to bury, the skeletons they hoped would stay locked in the closet. But the truth always has a way of coming out, doesn't it? So buckle up, folks, because we're about to take a wild ride through 10 Canadian conspiracies that went from fringe theories to undeniable facts. Get ready to question everything you thought you knew about the true North, because things are about to get weird. Let's do it. Alright, let's kick things off with a story that'll chill you to the bone. We're talking CIA, mind control, and some seriously messed up experiments. All happening right here in Canada. Yeah, I'm talking about MK Ultra, and specifically, what went down at the Allen Memorial Institute in Montreal. Now, this place was supposed to be a psychiatric hospital, but in the 50s and 60s, it became a playground for some seriously twisted science. Patients, and I use that term loosely, were subjected to horrific experiments, all funded by the CIA, and get this, with the Canadian government's knowledge. We're talking drug-induced comas, massive doses of electroshock therapy, and even brainwashing techniques using repetitive audio loops. Imagine being strapped down, pumped full of drugs, and bombarded with sounds, all in the name of therapy. These poor people were guinea pigs in a twisted game, their minds poked and prodded like lab rats. And the worst part? They had no idea what was happening to them. It was brutal, man. The goal of MK Ultra was to develop mind control techniques, ways to break someone, program them, and turn them into weapons. And they were using Canadian citizens to do it. So, how did this go on for so long? Well, secrecy was key. The CIA and the Canadian government wanted to keep this whole thing under wraps. No surprise there, right? They knew it was illegal, unethical, and if the public ever found out, it would be a scandal of epic proportions. But you can't keep a lid on everything. In the 80s, some brave survivors started speaking out about the horrors they endured at the Allen Memorial Institute. Lawsuits were filed, and the Canadian government, faced with undeniable evidence, was forced to admit that, yeah, this crazy stuff actually happened. Some victims received settlements, but many felt justice wasn't served. And here's the kicker. The full extent of what went down at the Allen Memorial Institute is still shrouded in secrecy. Some records were destroyed, others remain classified. Who knows what other twisted experiments they were conducting in the name of national security? It's a dark chapter in Canadian history, and it makes you wonder what else they've been keeping from us. Get ready for this one, because it's heavy. We're talking about the dark legacy of Canada's residential school system, a system designed to erase the culture and identity of Indigenous peoples. This is a story of forced assimilation, abuse, and cultural genocide. For over a century, the Canadian government, with the help of the Catholic Church, ripped Indigenous children from their families and forced them into these schools. The goal? To kill the Indian in the child. They wanted to strip these kids of their language, their culture, their very identity, and mold them into what they considered civilized citizens. These kids were abused, neglected, and stripped of their heritage. They were forbidden from speaking their languages, practicing their traditions, even from acknowledging their own families. It was a systematic attempt to break their spirits and erase their culture. For years, survivors of these schools shared their stories. Stories of horrific abuse, of children disappearing, of unspeakable trauma. But their voices were silenced, dismissed as exaggerations. The government denied it, the church denied it. They wanted to keep it all buried. But then, in 2021, the truth literally started coming out of the ground. The discovery of unmarked graves containing the remains of 215 Indigenous children at the site of the former Kamloops Indian Residential School in British Columbia sent shockwaves through Canada and the world. This wasn't just a few isolated incidents. Similar discoveries were made at other former residential school sites across the country. The sheer number of unmarked graves, the tiny shoes found at these sites, it painted a horrifying picture of what really happened at these schools. It wasn't just neglect, it was intentional, systematic erasure of an entire generation. The truth was undeniable. The stories of the survivors, once dismissed, were finally believed. The Canadian government and the Catholic Church were forced to acknowledge the horrors they had inflicted upon generations of Indigenous peoples. This dark chapter in Canadian history is a stark reminder of the devastating consequences of colonialism and the importance of listening to the voices of those who have been silenced for far too long. It's a wound that is still healing, and the scars of this systemic abuse will continue to impact generations to come. Alright, so picture this. 1970 Canada, the FLQ, these Quebec separatists, they kidnap a British diplomat and a Quebec government minister. Now kidnapping, that's some serious shit, right? You'd think the government's gotta do something drastic. And they did. Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau, he goes full on, invoking the War Measures Act. This is like martial law, man. In peacetime, tanks on the streets of Montreal, soldiers everywhere. It was intense. Hundreds of people were arrested, and not just suspects, but activists, artists, writers, anyone they thought might be sympathetic to the FLQ. And they didn't need warrants, no charges, nothing. Just scooped them up. Civil liberties? Gone, man, suspended. The government said it was necessary to fight terrorism, to keep people safe. But was it really? Or was there something else going on? See, here's where things get interesting. Years later, when they declassified some of the files, it turned out the government knew the FLQ wasn't as big of a threat as they made them out to be. They knew the FLQ was a small group, not capable of some massive uprising, yet they used the kidnappings to create this climate of fear, this sense of urgency, to justify cracking down on dissent in Quebec. Now think about that. They used a crisis, maybe even exaggerated it, to silence opposition and consolidate their own power. That's some real Machiavellian shit, man. And it makes you wonder, what were they really afraid of? Was it really just a few kidnappers? Or were they more concerned with crushing the entire separatist movement, even if it meant trampling on people's rights? Alright, let's talk about UFOs, man. I know what you're thinking. Joe's gone full-on conspiracy theorist now. But hold on, because this one's actually documented. We're talking about Project Magnet, a top-secret Canadian government program from the 1950s, dedicated to investigating UFOs. They weren't just looking for little green men, though. They were trying to understand the technology behind these unexplained flying objects. I'm talking about magnetic propulsion systems, anti-gravity, the kind of stuff that sounds like science fiction but could change everything. Leading the charge was this engineer, Wilbert Smith. He was convinced that UFOs were real and that the government needed to figure out how they worked. And get this, he wasn't some fringe lunatic, he was a respected engineer working for the Canadian government. Of course, for years the government denied everything. They said it was all just nonsense, that there was no such thing as Project Magnet. But then, in 1969, they had to come clean. Official documents were released, proving that the Canadian government had been funding UFO research and that they believed there was something real to the sightings. They weren't just dismissing it as weather balloons or swamp gas, these guys were taking it seriously. So why the cover-up? Well, think about it. You're the government, and you've got proof that something is flying around up there that you can't explain. People would freak out, man. They were probably worried about mass panic, about people losing their minds, and maybe, just maybe, they were afraid of what they might find. Imagine if they actually figured out how these things worked. The implications would be insane. Project Magnet is a perfect example of how governments keep secrets, even when those secrets are about things that seem totally out there. What else are they hiding from us? Alright, we all know the RCMP, right? The Mounties, those iconic red uniforms, always getting their man. They're like Canada's national symbol. But what if I told you they were running a secret, illegal campaign of sabotage and espionage against their own citizens? We're talking about the 1970s, and the RCMP is worried about the growing separatist movement in Quebec. So they decide to take matters into their own hands, forming a secret unit to disrupt and discredit the movement. These guys weren't messing around. They were burning down barns, breaking into offices, planting false documents, even stealing dynamite. They were like a rogue paramilitary force operating within the RCMP. And the craziest part? They were doing all of this with the knowledge and approval of high-ranking government officials. It was like something out of a spy thriller, except it was happening right here in Canada. When the truth finally came out, it was a huge scandal. The government, of course, denied everything at first, but then a public inquiry in 1979 exposed the whole thing. They called it the Dirty Tricks Campaign, and it rocked the nation. The RCMP tried to justify their actions by saying they were just trying to protect national unity. They claimed they were fighting fire with fire, that they had to resort to these tactics to combat the threat from the separatists. But critics called it what it was, domestic terrorism by the state. They argued that the RCMP had become a law unto itself, operating outside the law and violating the very rights they were supposed to be protecting. The RCMP Dirty Tricks campaign is a dark chapter in Canadian history. It's a reminder that even in a democracy, power can corrupt, and those who are supposed to protect us can sometimes become the very threat we need protection from. Alright folks, we're talking about Agent Orange. You know, that nasty chemical they used to defoliate jungles in Vietnam. Horrible stuff. Caused all sorts of health problems for veterans. But here's the kicker. It wasn't just Vietnam. Turns out, the US and Canadian militaries were testing this stuff right here in Canada, man. In New Brunswick, to be exact. They were spraying it all over the forest, man. Seeing how the trees reacted, how the animals reacted. And you know who they didn't tell? The people living there? No, they kept it hush-hush for decades. Said it never happened. But then, people started getting sick. Veterans, local residents, all sorts of weird health issues popping up. Cancers, birth defects, you name it. And slowly but surely, documents started surfacing, confirming what many had suspected all along. Agent Orange testing near CFB Gagetown. The government tried to deny it, of course, but the evidence was right there in black and white. They were spraying this toxic crap all over the place, and they didn't give a damn about the consequences. Now, why the cover-up? Well, think about it. Agent Orange was a PR nightmare for the US government. They knew it was causing health problems, but they didn't want to admit liability, especially not on Canadian soil. So they swept it under the rug, hoping nobody would notice. But people did notice, man. They got sick, their families got sick, and they started asking questions. They demanded answers, and they demanded justice. And you know what? It's still going on. Veterans and their families are still fighting for compensation, for recognition of what happened. This whole thing stinks to high heaven, man. It's a classic case of the government thinking they can get away with anything because they're the government. They put people's lives at risk, and for what? Some military experiment? It's just wrong. And the worst part is, we still don't know the full extent of the damage. How many people were affected? How many are still suffering? These are questions that need answers. We need to hold these people accountable for what they did. Alright, let's talk about the sponsorship scandal. This one's a real doozy, man. It's about corruption, greed, and the abuse of power. In the early 2000s, word started getting around that something fishy was going on with government contracts in Quebec. Millions of dollars were being funneled to advertising firms, and nobody seemed to know what they were doing to earn that money. Now, the government's story was that these were legitimate contracts to promote federalism in Quebec. But come on, man, we're not stupid. It didn't take a genius to figure out that something was rotten in the state of Canada. Turns out a lot of these firms were closely tied to the Liberal Party. They were donors, supporters, you get the picture. So basically, taxpayer money was being used to line the pockets of Liberal cronies. It was a giant slush fund, plain and simple. And the worst part, the work they were supposedly doing was often shoddy or non-existent. We're talking about inflated invoices, bogus reports, the whole 9 yards. This thing was a textbook case of political corruption, and it went all the way to the top. Prime Minister Jean Chrétien, the guy in charge, claimed he didn't know anything about it. But come on, man, how could he not know? The whole thing blew up in their faces, of course. There was a public inquiry, the Gomery inquiry, and it was like a scene out of a movie. Politicians squirming under oath, bureaucrats pointing fingers, bags of cash changing hands. It was wild, man. The inquiry exposed the whole sordid affair in all its glory. It showed how deep the corruption ran, how much money was wasted, and how the public trust had been betrayed. It was a national embarrassment, and it cost the liberals dearly. They lost the next election and Chrétien's legacy was tarnished. But you know what the real tragedy is? This kind of stuff probably goes on all the time, it's just that this time they got caught. It makes you wonder what else is going on behind closed doors. How much taxpayer money is being wasted, how much corruption is being swept under the rug. It's enough to make you want to pull your hair out, man. This is why people are so cynical about politics. This is why so many people have lost faith in the system. Now this one is a real head-scratcher, man. We're talking about foreign interference in Canadian elections. Specifically Chinese interference. Now this isn't some crazy conspiracy theory, this is real. We're talking about intelligence reports, leaked documents, the whole shebang. In 2023 and 2024, CSIS, that's the Canadian version of the CIA, started dropping bombshells. They were saying that China had been meddling in Canadian elections. Not just a little bit, but on a significant scale. We're talking about influencing candidates, funding campaigns, intimidating voters, the works, man. They even said that some Canadian politicians might be compromised. Think about that for a second. Elected officials, potentially in the pocket of a foreign government. Now, the government is saying they're taking it seriously, but a lot of people are skeptical. They're saying the government is dragging its feet, that they're more interested in protecting their own hides than getting to the bottom of this. And you know what? I can't say I blame them for being suspicious. There's a lot of smoke here, and where there's smoke, there's usually fire. Here's the thing, man, this isn't just about politics. This is about the integrity of our democracy. If foreign governments can just waltz in here and start picking our leaders, then what does that say about our country? What does that say about our sovereignty? It's a scary thought, man, and it's not just China either. We've seen reports of Russian interference, Iranian interference, you name it. It seems like everybody wants a piece of the Canadian pie. And who can blame them? We've got a stable economy, a peaceful society, and a government that's easily manipulated. It's like shooting fish in a barrel for these guys. We need to wake up, man. We need to start taking this stuff seriously. We need to protect our democracy from foreign interference, or else we're going to wake up one day and find out that we're no longer in control of our own country. And that's a terrifying thought. Alright, this next one is heavy, man. We're talking about forced sterilization of Indigenous women in Canada. For years, these women have been saying they were sterilized without their consent. In hospitals, during childbirth, you name it. It sounded crazy, like something out of a dystopian sci-fi movie. Who would believe that? But here's the thing, lawsuits started popping up. Testimonies from victims, heartbreaking stories. And guess what? It wasn't just some crazy conspiracy theory, it was real. This went on as recently as the 2000s. Eugenics, man, straight up. They tried to hide it, sweep it under the rug. Why? Because it's a freaking abomination, that's why. It shows you how deep the racism and control went in Canadian institutions. We're not talking about the dark ages here. This is modern times. It's a dark stain on Canada's history, and we need to talk about it. Think about it. You're going in to have a baby, to bring life into the world. And then, without your consent, your ability to have more children is taken away from you. It's a violation on a fundamental level, stripping away a woman's autonomy over her own body. And it happened to countless Indigenous women. The government, of course, didn't want to admit to this. Who wants to own up to something so horrific? But the evidence was overwhelming. This wasn't just a few isolated incidents, it was systemic, a pattern of abuse that went on for far too long. And the impact, it's intergenerational trauma, man. It affects families, communities, entire generations. The scars of this dark chapter in Canadian history are still felt today. It's a reminder that we can't just brush things like this under the rug. We need to acknowledge them, learn from them, and make sure they never happen again. Okay, so after 9/11 things got pretty wild, right? The US was on edge, understandably so. But they started doing some shady stuff, man, like extraordinary renditions, basically kidnapping suspected terrorists and flying them to secret prisons, black sites for interrogation. And guess what? Canada was involved. One case that really blew the lid off this whole thing was the Mar RR case. This guy, RR, was a Canadian citizen. He was just passing through JFK Airport when they snatched him up. They suspected he had ties to terrorism. But here's the thing, he didn't. They sent him to Syria, man. Syria, where he was tortured for a year. Can you imagine? And it turns out, CSIS, our Canadian intelligence agency, and the RCMP, they provided information that led to RR's detention. Bad information. Naturally, the government denied any wrongdoing at first. They were like, nope, not us. We didn't do anything wrong. But then a public inquiry happened, and everything came out. All the dirty laundry was aired out for everyone to see. It was a huge scandal, man. I mean, you've got a Canadian citizen being tortured in a foreign prison because of bad intel from our own government. It doesn't get much worse than that. In the end, they paid RR a $10 million settlement. But here's the thing. Money can't erase what happened. It can't give him back that year of his life, the trauma, the pain. It's a dark mark on Canada's reputation. And it makes you wonder, what else is going on that we don't know about? So there you have it, folks. 10 conspiracy theories that turned out to be true. From mind control experiments to government cover-ups to shady dealings with foreign powers, Canada's got its share of secrets. It's enough to make you wonder, what else is going on behind closed doors? The lesson here is simple. Question everything. Don't just accept what you're told. Do your own research. Think for yourself. Because sometimes the truth is stranger than fiction. And often, it's a lot darker. Thanks for joining me on the Hey How You Doing podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, share it, rate it, and let us know what Canadian secrets you want us to dig into next. Until then, stay woke, my friends. Even in the land of the maple leaf. Peace out.